The silence of the October night was broken by a single cry, not from the saloon where men drowning sorrows found their voices, nor from the jailhouse where occasional outlaws awaited their fate, but from the small doctor's office on the edge of La Junta, Colorado. It was 1878, and Olivia Hayes had just brought her son into a world that would judge him before he took his first steps. "It's a boy," Dr. Simmons announced, placing the squalling infant in Olivia's arms. The doctor's kind eyes crinkled at the corners, but concern shadowed his face as he watched the exhausted 22-year-old cradle her newborn. "Have you decided on a name?" Olivia gazed down at the tiny red face, his wisps of dark hair still damp from birth. "Samuel," she whispered. "Samuel Hayes." Dr. Simmons nodded, moving toward his desk. "And the father's name for the birth record?" The question hung in the air like gunsmoke after a shootout. Olivia's fingers trembled as they traced her son's cheek. "There is no father," she said firmly, though her voice caught on the last word. "Olivia," Dr. Simmons sighed, his pen poised above the paper. "You know how people talk. It won't be easy." "I know what I'm facing," she replied, her green eyes flashing with determination despite her exhaustion. "But I won't name a man who isn't here to claim his son." The doctor didn't press further. He'd delivered enough babies in La Junta to know that some stories weren't his to unravel. The space for the father's name remained blank as he filed away the birth certificate, a small piece of paper that would shape the boy's future in ways neither of them could predict. 3 days later, Olivia stood on the rickety porch of her small homestead at the edge of town, baby Samuel bundled against her chest. The modest house had been her parents' final gift before fever took them both last winter. Now it was all she had, that, and the seamstress skills that barely kept food on her table. The October wind whipped across the plains, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of an early winter. Olivia pulled her shawl tighter around Samuel and herself, watching as a lone rider approached from the direction of town. She recognized the broad-shouldered silhouette immediately. Matthew Lawson was hard to miss, even at a distance. The rancher's tall frame sat easy in the saddle, his movements fluid with the natural grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. As he drew closer, she could make out his sun-weathered face beneath the wide brim of his Stetson. Olivia tensed. Matthew owned the Double L, the largest cattle ranch in the county. Their paths rarely crossed except when he came to town for supplies or when she delivered mended clothes to his ranch hands. But there was no mistaking his destination now. He was heading straight for her property. "Miss Hayes," Matthew called as he dismounted, tying his chestnut mare to the hitching post. His deep voice carried across the yard, and his blue eyes immediately fell to the bundle in her arms. "I heard the news." Olivia lifted her chin. "News travels fast in La Junta." "Too fast sometimes," he agreed, removing his hat as he approached. Sand-colored hair, touched by the sun, fell across his forehead. At 30, Matthew Lawson carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. "I wanted to see how you were faring." There was no judgment in his voice, but Olivia had grown accustomed to protecting herself. "We're managing just fine, Mr. Lawson. Thank you for your concern." Matthew's gaze remained on Samuel, whose tiny face peeked out from the blankets. "He looks strong," he observed, a gentle smile softening his usually stoic expression. "He is," Olivia confirmed, surprised by the genuine warmth in Matthew's voice. "Would you like to come in for coffee? The wind's picking up." Matthew hesitated, then nodded. "Much obliged." Inside, the modest cabin was meticulously clean but sparsely furnished. A quilt-covered bed occupied one corner, while a small table with 2 chairs stood near the stone fireplace. Lengths of fabric and a sewing basket indicated Olivia's trade. "Please sit," she offered, carefully placing Samuel in a handmade cradle before moving to stoke the fire. The coffee pot already hung over the low flames. "You've done well with this place," Matthew commented, setting his hat on his knee. "Not many would manage alone out here." Olivia's hand stilled momentarily. "I've never had much choice in managing alone, Mr. Lawson." The rancher accepted the steaming cup she offered, their fingers brushing briefly. "Matthew," he corrected. "Mr. Lawson was my father." She nodded, taking the seat across from him. "What brings you here, Matthew? I doubt it was merely to check on our well-being." His blue eyes, clear as Colorado sky, met hers directly. "Partially that," he admitted, "but also to offer you work." "Work?" Olivia's brow furrowed. "I already mend for your ranch hands. This would be different." Matthew set down his cup. "My sister Emily is arriving next week from Boston. She's coming to live at the Double L after losing her husband last year. She'll need help getting settled, learning how things work out here." He glanced at Samuel. "I thought it might suit you better than piecework." "You could bring the boy. There's a small cottage near the main house that would be yours." Olivia stared at him, suspicion warring with practicality. "Why would you offer this?" Matthew's weathered hands turned the coffee cup slowly. "Emily needs someone she can trust." "You need steady work that allows you to care for your son." His gaze was steady. "It's a fair arrangement. And the fact that my child has no father's name, that doesn't concern you." A muscle worked in Matthew's jaw. "A child shouldn't bear the weight of others' judgments." Samuel stirred in his cradle, making small, mewling sounds that quickly grew into hunger-driven cries. Olivia excused herself to lift him, turning slightly away as she adjusted her dress to feed him. Matthew respectfully averted his eyes, focusing instead on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "You should know," he continued quietly, "that people talk. Living out here alone with a child, it won't get easier." "I'm well aware of what people say," Olivia replied, her voice tight. "At the ranch, you'd have protection. Respect." Matthew rose, placing his hat back on his head. "Think about it. I'll return in 3 days for your answer." After he left, Olivia sat by the window watching his figure disappear into the gathering dusk, Samuel sleeping against her chest. The proposition turned in her mind like a coin flipped over and over. Independence had always been her North Star, but the practicalities of raising a child alone on the frontier were daunting. She gazed down at her son's peaceful face. "What should we do, little one?" she whispered. But Samuel only sighed in his sleep, unaware that his future hung in the balance. 3 days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and careful consideration. When Matthew's tall figure appeared on the horizon once more, Olivia was waiting on the porch, her meager possessions packed in 2 trunks. "We accept your offer," she said simply as he dismounted. Matthew nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I brought the wagon," he said, gesturing to where it waited on the main road with a ranch hand at the reins, "and some help with your things." By nightfall, Olivia and Samuel were settled in the cottage at the Double L. The small house was plain but sound, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting area. It sat 100 yards from the main ranch house, close enough for convenience but distant enough for privacy. "Emily arrives tomorrow," Matthew informed her as they stood on the cottage porch under a sky scattered with stars. "She'll be grateful to have you here." Olivia nodded, holding Samuel close. "Thank you for this opportunity." Matthew's eyes lingered on her face longer than necessary before he cleared his throat. "Get some rest. Dawn comes early on a ranch." As his footsteps faded into the night, Olivia wondered if she'd made the right decision. But as she looked out over the vast expanse of the Double L, the solid barn, the grazing cattle, The lights of the bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: security. The weeks that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Emily Lawson proved to be nothing like the refined Boston widow Olivia had imagined. At 28, she was lively, practical, and eager to learn the ways of ranch life. She took to Olivia immediately, and more surprisingly to Samuel, often offering to rock him while Olivia helped with household tasks. "He's absolutely perfect," Emily declared one evening as she cradled the now 2-month-old boy. They sat in the main house's comfortable parlor, the November chill kept at bay by a roaring fire. "I've never seen such long eyelashes on a baby." Olivia smiled, her hands busy with mending one of Matthew's shirts. "He's growing so fast, I can hardly believe it." Emily's expression softened. "You're doing a wonderful job with him, Olivia, truly." The simple validation nearly undid her. Olivia blinked rapidly, focusing on her stitches. "Thank you." "Has there been any word from his father?" Emily asked carefully, her voice low even though they were alone in the house. Matthew was out checking the herd with his foreman. Olivia's needle stilled. "There won't be," she said firmly. "He made his choice before Samuel was born." Emily nodded, not pressing further. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about plans for the upcoming Thanksgiving celebration. Later that night, as Olivia walked back to the cottage, Samuel bundled against her chest. She spotted Matthew by the corral. He stood motionless, watching the stars, his profile outlined by moonlight. She could have continued on, but something made her pause. "You're up late," she called softly. Matthew turned, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Just thinking," he replied, walking toward her. As he drew closer, she could see the weariness in his face. "Worried about the north pasture. We need snow, but not too soon." "The life of a rancher," she observed. "Always at nature's mercy." He chuckled, the sound warm in the cold night. "Something like that." His gaze dropped to Samuel. "How's the boy tonight?" "Growing stronger every day," Olivia answered, unable to keep the pride from her voice. Would you like to hold him?" The question surprised them both. In the 2 months since Samuel's birth, Matthew had never once held the child, though he often inquired about him. Matthew hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." With careful movements, Olivia transferred Samuel into his arms. The baby stirred but didn't wake, settling against Matthew's chest with complete trust. The rancher cradled him expertly, one large hand supporting Samuel's head. "You've held babies before," Olivia observed. Matthew's smile held a trace of sadness. "My sister had a son who died in infancy, before her husband. That's part of why she came west. Too many memories." He looked down at Samuel, his expression softening. "Every child deserves a chance to grow up strong, to know they're wanted." Something in his voice made Olivia's heart ache. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "They do." They stood together under the vast Colorado sky, the baby between them, and for a moment, Olivia could almost imagine they were a family, not the broken pieces of separate lives, but something whole and right. The moment passed when Samuel began to fuss, hungry and ready to be fed. Matthew carefully handed him back, his fingers brushing against Olivia's. "Good night, Miss Hayes," he said formally, though his eyes held something warmer. "Good night, Mr. Lawson," she replied, matching his tone while fighting a smile. As December swept across the plains, bringing bitter cold and the first heavy snows, life at the Double L took on a festive atmosphere. Emily threw herself into Christmas preparations with the enthusiasm of someone embracing a new beginning. The main house was decorated with pine boughs, red ribbons, and candles, filling the rooms with the scent of evergreen and spice. Olivia found herself drawn into the celebrations, helping Emily bake cookies and prepare gifts for the ranch hands. Samuel, now 3 months old, watched the proceedings with wide, curious eyes from his basket or the arms of whoever had claimed holding rights for the hour. It was during this time that Olivia began to notice a change in Matthew. The reserved rancher seemed to seek out her company more frequently, stopping by the cottage with small gifts, a jar of honey, a handcrafted wooden rattle for Samuel, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. "You didn't have to," Olivia protested when he presented her with a fine wool shawl deep green like her eyes. Matthew shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Saw it in town. Thought it might keep you warm on your walks between houses." Emily observed these interactions with poorly concealed delight, often finding reasons to leave them alone together. "Matthew needs someone like you," she confided to Olivia one afternoon as they prepared dinner. "Someone strong but gentle too." Olivia shook her head, cheeks warming. "I'm his employee, Emily, and I have Samuel to consider." "My brother adores that boy," Emily countered, her eyes knowing. "Haven't you noticed how he looks at both of you?" Before Olivia could respond, the door opened, bringing in a blast of cold air and Matthew himself, his coat dusted with snow. "Storm's coming," he announced. "A big one from the looks of the clouds." The blizzard hit that night with unexpected ferocity. Wind howled around the cottage, finding every crack and crevice. Olivia piled blankets over Samuel's cradle and stoked the fire higher, but the temperature continued to drop as midnight approached. A pounding at the door startled her. She opened it to find Matthew, snow coating his shoulders and hat. "Get whatever you need for the night," he ordered without preamble. "The cottage is too exposed. You'll both freeze before morning." Olivia didn't argue. She quickly gathered Samuel's things and wrapped him securely against the cold. Matthew took the bag from her hands and ushered them through the blinding snow to the main house, his arm around her shoulders creating a shield against the wind. The warmth of the house enveloped them as they stumbled through the door. Emily was waiting, already turning down the bed in the guest room. "Thank God," she breathed, taking Samuel while Olivia removed her ice-crusted shawl. "I was worried sick about you two out there." "We're fine now," Olivia assured her, though her teeth chattered as she spoke. "Thanks to your brother." Matthew stood by the door, shaking snow from his coat. "I should have brought you in before the storm hit. I knew the cottage doesn't hold heat well." "You're here now," Emily said firmly. "That's what matters." She handed Samuel back to Olivia. "Get warmed up." "I'll make hot chocolate." Left alone with Matthew in the entryway, Olivia felt suddenly shy. "Thank you," she said softly, "for watching out for us." Matthew stepped closer, gently tucking a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Always," he promised, his voice rough with an emotion she didn't dare name. The blizzard raged for 3 days, trapping them all in the main house. Olivia and Samuel remained in the guest room, while Matthew and Emily maintained their usual routines as much as possible. The forced proximity created an intimacy none of them had expected. On the third evening, after Emily had retired early with a headache, Olivia sat in the parlor with Samuel asleep in her arms. The fire crackled comfortingly, and outside, the storm had finally begun to subside. Matthew entered quietly, 2 glasses of brandy in his hands. "Thought you might want something to warm you," he offered, setting one on the table beside her. "Thank you." Olivia smiled, her free hand reaching for the glass. "It feels strange to sit here doing nothing while the storm does all the work outside." Matthew took the seat opposite her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Sometimes the hardest work is waiting," he observed. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the crackling fire and Samuel's soft breathing. "May I ask you something personal?" Matthew finally ventured. Olivia tensed slightly but nodded. "You've earned that right, I think." Matthew leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Samuel's father, was he? Did he hurt you?" The question, asked with such gentle concern, nearly broke her composure. Olivia looked down at her sleeping son. "Not in the way you're thinking," she answered carefully. "James was passing through La Junta last winter, staying at the boarding house where I was working after my parents died. He was handsome, charming. Said he was heading to California to make his fortune." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "We spent time together. He made promises. I believed him." Her voice grew quieter. "By the time I realized I was carrying his child, he was long gone. I wrote to him at the address he'd given me in San Francisco. The letter came back marked no such person." Matthew's expression darkened. "He abandoned you both." "He never knew about Samuel," Olivia clarified. "And perhaps it's better that way. A man who could disappear so completely probably wouldn't make much of a father." "Still," Matthew's voice was tight with restrained anger, "a man should stand by his responsibilities." Olivia looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Is that why you offered me this position? Out of some sense of responsibility to a woman in trouble?" "No," Matthew answered immediately, his blue eyes intense. "I offered because I recognized something in you, that first-day strength, pride, determination. The kind of spirit the West was built on." He hesitated. "The kind of woman I've always admired." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Olivia felt her heart quicken. "And Samuel?" she asked softly. Matthew's expression softened as he looked at the sleeping infant. "A child deserves a chance, a good start, without judgment for circumstances he didn't create." Olivia blinked back unexpected tears. "You're a good man, Matthew Lawson." He shook his head. "Just trying to be decent in an indecent world." Samuel stirred in her arms, making small noises that signaled he would soon wake hungry. Matthew stood, taking her empty glass. "I should let you tend to him," he said. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Matthew." As he reached the doorway, he paused, looking back at her. "For what it's worth, James was a fool to leave. The biggest fool I've ever heard of." After the blizzard, life at the Double L returned to its rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted between Olivia and Matthew. There was a new awareness in their interactions, a current of unspoken possibilities. Christmas arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. The ranch hands gathered in the main house for dinner, filling the rooms with laughter and stories. Samuel, dressed in a tiny outfit Emily had sewn for him, was passed from one admiring cowboy to another, cooing and grabbing at mustaches with delighted fascination. "Never seen a baby take to ranch life so natural," observed Tom, the grizzled foreman, as he reluctantly surrendered Samuel to another waiting hand. "Boy's gonna make a fine cowboy someday." Olivia, watching from across the room, felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected community that had embraced her son without question or judgment. Her gaze met Matthew's, and the warmth in his eyes made her pulse quicken. Later, after the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and Emily had gone to bed, Matthew asked Olivia to stay behind. He led her to his study, where a small package waited on his desk. "I wanted to give you this privately," he explained, handing her the carefully wrapped gift. "Merry Christmas, Olivia." Inside was a silver locket, simple but beautifully crafted. When she opened it, she found a tiny lock of Samuel's dark hair on one side. "The other side is for whatever you choose," Matthew said softly. "A memory, a hope, something precious." Olivia stared at the gift, overcome. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything." Matthew took the locket from her trembling hands and gently fastened it around her neck. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin at her nape, sending a shiver down her spine. "I just wanted you to have something that was yours alone." Their faces were close, his breath warm against her cheek. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest as Matthew's hand moved to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. "Olivia," he murmured, her name a question and a prayer. She answered by closing the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as if she belonged there, had always belonged there. When they finally parted, breathless and dazed, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you holding Samuel on your porch," he confessed. Olivia smiled, her fingers threading through his hair. "Even with my reputation." A woman with a fatherless child, Matthew's expression grew serious. "Especially then. Your courage, your dignity, despite everything," he shook his head in wonder. "You amazed me, Olivia. You still do." She kissed him again, pouring all her complicated emotions into the connection between them. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Olivia felt not just accepted, but desired not despite her circumstances, but completely, without reservation. As January's harsh weather kept the ranch isolated, Olivia and Matthew's relationship deepened in the quiet intimacy of shared days and firelit evenings. Emily, thrilled by the development, often volunteered to watch Samuel so they could have time alone together. "I've never seen my brother so happy," she told Olivia one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. Samuel sat in a basket nearby, playing with wooden blocks. "It's like he's finally found his purpose." Olivia blushed, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. "He's been very kind to us." Emily laughed. "Oh, Olivia, it's far more than kindness and you know it. Matthew is in love with you." The words spoken aloud so plainly made Olivia's hand still. "And Samuel?" she asked quietly. "What about him?" "Matthew adores that boy," Emily said firmly. Anyone with eyes can see it. It was true. Over the past months, Matthew had taken to spending time with Samuel whenever possible. He would hold the baby while discussing ranch business with his foreman, carry him around the barn to inspect the animals, or simply sit with him in the evenings, telling stories in his deep, rumbling voice that never failed to captivate the child. Samuel, now 4 months old and increasingly alert, seemed equally attached to Matthew. His tiny face would light up at the sound of the rancher's boots on the porch, and he would babble excitedly whenever Matthew entered a room. The realization that they were becoming a family, in every way that mattered, both thrilled and terrified Olivia. She had learned the hard way that happiness could be fleeting, that promises could be broken. One evening in late January, while a winter wind howled outside, Matthew sat with Olivia on the parlor sofa, Samuel asleep in his cradle nearby. They had been discussing plans for spring calving when Matthew suddenly fell silent, a contemplative expression on his face. "What is it?" Olivia asked, recognizing the look that meant he was wrestling with something important. Matthew took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been thinking about us, about our future." Olivia's pulse quickened. "Oh." "I want to marry you, Olivia," he said plainly, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I want to be a husband to you and a father to Samuel. I want us to be a real family." Though she had begun to hope for this, hearing the words aloud left her speechless. Matthew continued, filling the silence. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, both of you." His voice grew husky with emotion. "Samuel deserves my name, and so do you if you'll have it." Tears filled Olivia's eyes. "Matthew, are you certain? People will talk." "They'll assume, let them," he interrupted firmly. "I don't give a damn what anyone thinks. I know what's in my heart," He squeezed her hand. "What matters is what you want. Do you love me, Olivia?" "Yes," she whispered without hesitation. "Yes, I love you." "Then marry me. Let me be Samuel's father in every way that counts." Olivia glanced at her sleeping son, then back at the man who had opened his home and his heart to them both. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, I'll marry you." Matthew's face broke into a radiant smile before he pulled her into a kiss that sealed their promise. They were married 2 weeks later in the parlor of the main house. Reverend Collins from La Junta performed the ceremony, with Emily as witness and Samuel dressed in a tiny suit. Emily had fashioned watching wide-eyed from his aunt's arms. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared as the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the small gathering. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Matthew kissed his bride with reverent tenderness, then turned to take Samuel from Emily. Holding the boy securely in one arm, he wrapped the other around Olivia, creating a circle that encompassed their new family. "I have one more thing I'd like to do today, Reverend," Matthew said, his voice steady and determined. "I want to officially recognize Samuel as my son." Olivia looked up at him in surprise. They had discussed Matthew adopting Samuel legally once they were married, but she hadn't expected him to move so quickly. Reverend Collins nodded, understanding immediately. "A recognition of paternity." "Of course." Matthew faced the small gathering, Samuel settled comfortably against his chest. "This boy came into the world without his father's name on record," he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Today, that changes. I claim him as my son before God and these witnesses." He looked down at Samuel, who reached up to pat his cheek with a tiny hand. "He's mine now, too," Matthew declared, his voice thick with emotion. "In my heart, in my home, and soon by law as well." Olivia couldn't stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming gratitude. Emily was openly weeping, and even the Reverend looked moved. "Let us pray," Reverend Collins said, raising his hands over the newly formed family. "Heavenly Father, bless this union of hearts and lives. Bless this child, Samuel, now claimed by a father's love. May they walk in your light all the days of their lives." After the Reverend departed, Emily hugged them both fiercely, then announced she was spending the night with friends in town to give them privacy. As the sun set over the Colorado plains, Olivia and Matthew stood on the porch of what was now their home, Samuel sleeping peacefully indoors. "Are you happy, Mrs. Lawson?" Matthew asked, his arm around her waist. Olivia leaned into his embrace. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully. "What you did today for Samuel, I meant every word," Matthew interrupted gently. "He is my son, Olivia. In every way that matters." She turned in his arms to face him. "You're an extraordinary man, Matthew Lawson." He smiled, touching the silver locket that hung around her neck. "I'm just a man who recognized the most precious gift life could offer." He bent to kiss her, sealing their new beginning under the vast canopy of stars. Spring came to the Double L with a rush of green across the plains and the joyful chaos of calving season. Olivia adjusted to her role as Mrs. Lawson with surprising ease, managing the household while caring for Samuel, who at 7 months was now sitting up and babbling constant streams of nearly words. Matthew filed the legal adoption papers in early April, making Samuel officially Samuel Hayes Lawson. The day the papers were finalized, he returned from town with a small wooden sign he'd commissioned from the carpenter, the Lawsons, which he mounted proudly by the front door. "Now it's official," he said, stepping back to admire his handiwork. "All 3 of us are Lawsons." Olivia slipped her arm around his waist. It's perfect. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right, as if the pieces of a puzzle had finally clicked into place. Matthew taught Olivia to ride, and soon they were taking family outings on horseback, Samuel securely strapped to Matthew's chest in a carrier he had designed himself. The ranch prospered under Matthew's careful management, and their happiness seemed to radiate outward, touching everyone connected to the Double L. Not everyone in La Junta approved of their union, of course. There were still whispers when Olivia went to town, sideways glances and abrupt silences when she entered shops. But with Matthew's name and protection, the open hostility she had once faced had largely dissipated. One day in late May, Olivia took Samuel to town to purchase supplies while Matthew tended to a sick mare. As she walked along the boardwalk, the baby balanced on her hip, she nearly collided with Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife and one of La Junta's most notorious gossips. Mrs. Lawson, the older woman acknowledged stiffly, her eyes flicking to Samuel. "Your boy is growing." "Thank you," Olivia replied politely. "He certainly is." Mrs. Peterson's thin lips pursed. It's fortunate he found a father willing to claim him regardless of circumstances. The barb was delivered with just enough civility to maintain the pretense of polite conversation, but its intent was clear. Olivia felt the familiar flash of shame and anger, but it was quickly replaced by a new, stronger feeling: pride. "Yes," she agreed, holding the woman's gaze steadily. "Samuel is blessed with a father who loves him completely, as am I with a husband who sees what truly matters in this world." She shifted Samuel higher on her hip. "If you'll excuse us, we need to finish our errands before heading home." She walked away with her head high, Samuel babbling happily against her shoulder. The encounter, rather than leaving her shaken as similar ones had in the past, filled her with a quiet confidence. She had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. Her family was built on love, the most honest foundation there could be. When she returned to the ranch, Matthew was waiting on the porch. As soon as the wagon pulled up, he strode forward to help her down, lifting Samuel from her arms with practiced ease. "There's my boy," he greeted, tossing the giggling baby gently in the air before settling him against his shoulder. "Did you help your mama in town?" "He was perfect," Olivia assured him, stretching up to kiss Matthew's cheek. "Though we did have an interesting encounter with Mrs. Peterson." Matthew's expression darkened. "Did she say something to upset you?" "She tried," Olivia admitted. "But I realized something today. Their opinions don't matter anymore. We know the truth of our family." She placed her hand over Matthew's where it supported Samuel. "This is real. What we've built together is real." Matthew's face softened, and he pulled her close with his free arm, creating that circle of three that had become her favorite place in the world. "Yes," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "This is the only truth that matters." That evening, after Samuel was asleep in his crib, Matthew led Olivia to the porch swing where they often sat to watch the sunset. The air was warm with late spring, scented with sage and new growth. "I have something to ask you," Matthew said, taking her hand in his. "Something I've been thinking about." Olivia looked at him curiously. "What is it?" "I want us to have more children," he said simply. "Brothers and sisters for Samuel, a house full of Lawsons." His blue eyes searched hers. "What do you think?" Joy bloomed in Olivia's chest, bright and warm. "I think that sounds wonderful," she answered, leaning against his shoulder. "A house full of little cowboys and cowgirls," Matthew chuckled, his arm tightening around her. "I'll teach them all to ride and rope. You can teach them to read and sew." "And love," Olivia added softly. "We'll teach them to love without reservation, the way you've loved Samuel and me." Matthew turned to her, his expression serious. "I thank God every day for bringing you both into my life," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I never knew what was missing until I found you." Under the vast Colorado sky, with the land stretching endlessly before them and their son sleeping peacefully inside, Olivia and Matthew sealed their dreams for the future with a kiss that promised forever. 1 year later, in the summer of 1880, the Double L Ranch was thriving. The spring roundup had been successful, the cattle fat and healthy, and the ranch's reputation had grown throughout the territory. Matthew's fair business practices and innovative ranching techniques had earned him the respect of neighbors and competitors alike. In the shade of the porch, Olivia sat watching Samuel, now 19 months old, toddle after a butterfly in the garden she had planted. His dark hair curled at the nape of his neck, and his sturdy legs had grown increasingly confident over the past months. "Papa, Papa," he called excitedly as Matthew emerged from the barn, his small arms raised in a demand to be lifted. Matthew obliged immediately, swinging the boy high before settling him on his shoulders. "What have you been doing, Cowboy?" he asked, walking toward Olivia. "Bug," Samuel declared triumphantly, pointing to the butterfly that had now landed on a sunflower. "That's right, a butterfly," Matthew corrected gently, lowering himself to the step beside Olivia. "Smart boy." Olivia smiled, resting her hand on her rounded belly. Their second child was due in less than 2 months, and though the summer heat made her uncomfortable at times, she couldn't help but feel profoundly content. Matthew noticed her movement and placed his hand over hers. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Well enough," she assured him. "Dr. Simmons says everything looks perfect." Samuel squirmed to be let down, and Matthew carefully set him on his feet, watching as he toddled back to his exploration of the garden. "He's going to be a wonderful big brother," Matthew observed. "Yes, he will," Olivia agreed, leaning against her husband's solid shoulder. "He has an excellent example to follow." Matthew turned to kiss her temple, his hand still protectively covering hers over their unborn child. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after my father, William." "William Lawson," Olivia tested the name. "It's strong, I like it." "And if it's a girl," Olivia smiled. "I was thinking perhaps we could name her after your mother, Elizabeth." Matthew's eyes softened with memory and gratitude. "She would have loved that, almost as much as she would have loved you and Samuel." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son's adventures in the garden, both lost in thoughts of the expanding family that would soon welcome a new member. In late August, Elizabeth Emily Lawson arrived after a relatively easy birth, a healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and a dusting of her mother's chestnut hair. Samuel approached his baby sister with solemn curiosity, gently patting her head under Matthew's watchful guidance. "Baby," he declared importantly. "My baby." "That's right," Matthew confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "Your baby sister, you're a big brother now." The look of pride on Samuel's face was matched only by the one on Matthew's, as he watched his son in every way that mattered take his first steps into his role as protective older brother. Life at the Double L adjusted to accommodate its newest member. Elizabeth, called Eliza by everyone except her aunt, who insisted on her full proper name, proved to be a calm, observant baby who rarely fussed unless she was hungry or tired. Samuel appointed himself her guardian, bringing toys to place beside her basket and reading to her from his picture books in a serious, if incomprehensible, monologue. Emily, who had by now settled permanently into Western life and even begun a courtship with a neighboring rancher, doted on both children equally. "My niece and nephew are the most beautiful children in Colorado," she would announce proudly to anyone who would listen. One evening in early autumn, as golden light stretched across the plains and painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and pink, Matthew found Olivia on the porch where she sat nursing Eliza. Samuel played quietly at her feet with wooden horses Matthew had carved for him. "The most beautiful sight in the world," Matthew said softly, settling beside her and dropping a kiss on the top of her head. Olivia smiled up at him. "Which one of us?" "All of you," he answered without hesitation. "My family, my whole world." Samuel abandoned his horses to climb into Matthew's lap, nestling against his chest with the complete trust of a child who had never known anything but love and security. "Story, Papa," he requested, his small fingers playing with a button on Matthew's shirt. Matthew wrapped one arm around his son while the other rested across Olivia's shoulders. "Once upon a time," he began, his deep voice gentle, "there was a lonely rancher who thought he had everything he needed: land, cattle, a good horse under him. But something was missing, though he didn't know what." Samuel looked up, eyes wide and attentive. Eliza continued nursing, her tiny hand wrapped around Olivia's finger. "Then one day," Matthew continued, his gaze meeting Olivia's over their children's heads, "he met a woman with the bravest heart he'd ever known and a baby boy who needed a father. And suddenly, the rancher realized what had been missing all along." He squeezed Olivia's shoulder gently. "It was them. It had always been them, even before he knew they existed." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she leaned into her husband's embrace. "And they lived happily ever after?" she asked softly. Matthew's smile was full of promise and certainty. "They're still living it," he corrected, gathering his family closer as the sun slipped below the horizon. "Every single day." As twilight deepened into night over the Double L, stars appeared one by one in the vast Colorado sky. Inside the ranch house, a lamp glowed in the window, a beacon of warmth and belonging in the wild frontier. The years that followed brought continued prosperity to the Double L and joy to the Lawson family. William James Lawson joined his siblings in the spring of 1882. A robust boy with his father's sandy hair and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, twin girls Sarah and Margaret completed their family, bringing the total to 5 children who filled the ranch house with laughter, occasional chaos, and boundless love. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, responsible young man who took naturally to ranch work, shadowing Matthew from the time he could sit securely on a horse. By his 10th birthday, he was already showing the makings of a skilled horseman and cattleman, with his father's steady temperament and his mother's quiet determination. One clear afternoon in the summer of 1889, as Olivia watched 11-year-old Samuel help Matthew and the hands with the younger horses in the corral, Emily joined her on the porch. "He's the spitting image of Matthew when he handles those horses," Emily observed, though both women knew there was no blood relation. "In every way that matters," Olivia agreed with a smile. Inside, Eliza was helping the 5-year-old twins with their letters while 7-year-old William constructed an elaborate fort from wooden blocks. The sounds of their voices questioning, explaining, occasionally arguing drifted through the open windows. "Did you ever imagine this?" Emily asked, gesturing to the thriving ranch and the children scattered across it. "When Matthew first brought you here," Olivia shook her head. "Never. I was just hoping for safety, for a chance to raise Samuel without constant judgment." She looked out at her eldest son, now confidently leading a yearling around the corral under Matthew's approving eye. "I got so much more." Later that evening, after the younger children were asleep and Eliza and Samuel had been allowed to stay up for an extra hour of reading, Olivia and Matthew stood on the porch watching the stars emerge. 11 years of marriage had only deepened their connection. Weathering the inevitable challenges of ranch life, child-rearing, and occasional disagreements with the solid foundation of respect and devotion they had built together. "I filed the last paperwork for the north section today," Matthew informed her, his arm around her waist. "Once it's processed, that land will be officially part of the Double L." Olivia leaned into him, appreciating both the security he had provided and the fact that he always consulted her on major ranch decisions. "It's good bottomland. The cattle will thrive there." Matthew nodded, his gaze moving beyond the immediate ranch buildings to the vast expanse that was now their domain. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "that we should update our will, formalize how the ranch will be divided among the children someday. All 5 portions equal." Olivia asked, knowing they had discussed this before. "Yes," Matthew confirmed without hesitation. "Samuel, Eliza, William, Sarah, and Margaret each with an equal share and equal say in the ranch's future." The casualness with which he included Samuel alongside their biological children still had the power to move Olivia deeply, even after all these years. "You've never once made a distinction," she said softly. "Not from the very first day." Matthew turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Because there is no distinction, Olivia. There never has been." He took both her hands in his. "Samuel was the gift that brought you to me, the son who made me a father before I had the right to claim the title. How could I ever see him as anything but my firstborn?" Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she rose on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring 11 years of gratitude and love into the connection between them. When they parted, Matthew gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "No tears," he murmured. "We're living our happily ever after, remember," Olivia laughed softly. "So we are." From inside came Samuel's voice calling for them. "Ma, Pa, Eliza won't let me have my turn with the new book." "Liar." Eliza's indignant response followed immediately. "I've been counting the minutes exactly like Pa taught us." Matthew and Olivia exchanged amused glances. "Duty calls," he said with a mock sigh. Hand in hand, they went inside to mediate the dispute between their eldest children, secure in the knowledge that the family they had built together against all odds and expectations was stronger than any challenge life could present. The Double L Ranch continued to flourish under the Lawsons' care, becoming one of the most respected cattle operations in Colorado. As the children grew, each found their place in the family business. Samuel eventually taking over much of the day-to-day management alongside his father, Eliza developing a talent for the financial aspects, William discovering a gift for breeding and improving their stock, and the twins as different in personality as they were identical in appearance, contributing their own unique strengths. In the autumn of 1900, as a new century approached, Matthew and Olivia celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary with a gathering that included not only their children but the extended family. The ranch had created longtime hands who had become like uncles to the Lawson children, neighbors who had become dear friends, and Emily and her husband Robert with their 3 children. After dinner, as lanterns glowed across the expanded ranch house, and music played from the gramophone that had been the family's Christmas splurge the previous year, Samuel, now a confident young man of 22, raised his glass for a toast. "To my parents," he began, his voice strong and clear, "who taught all of us what family truly means, who showed us that love, not blood, is what binds people together." He looked directly at Matthew, emotion evident in his eyes. "And to my father, who claimed me as his son when he didn't have to, who gave me his name and his heart without reservation." Matthew's arm tightened around Olivia as their eldest continued. "I've known the truth of my birth since I was old enough to understand," Samuel acknowledged, addressing the entire gathering now. "Ma and Pa never kept secrets from us. They taught us that honesty and love can overcome any difficulty." His gaze swept across his siblings. "And they gave me brothers and sisters who never for a moment made me feel like anything but their full-blooded kin." Eliza, now a striking young woman of 20, wiped a tear from her cheek. William, tall and lanky at 18, nodded solemnly. The 16-year-old twins linked arms, their expressions unusually serious for the typically mischievous pair. "So I ask you all to raise your glasses," Samuel concluded, "to Matthew and Olivia Lawson, who built this ranch, this family, and this legacy with nothing but hard work, unwavering principles, and boundless love." The toast was met with enthusiastic agreement from everyone present. As the celebration continued around them, Matthew led Olivia away from the crowd to a quiet corner of the porch. In the silver moonlight, he could still see the young woman who had stood defiant on her small homestead, infant in arms, facing an uncertain future with nothing but courage and determination. "You're staring," Olivia observed with a smile, the fine lines around her eyes crinkling. At 44, her chestnut hair now held strands of silver, but to Matthew, she had only grown more beautiful with the passing years. "Just admiring the view," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "Thinking about how lucky I am that you said yes all those years ago." Olivia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become her life's most comforting sound. "I'm the lucky one," she countered softly. "You gave us a life I never dared imagine." From inside came the sound of laughter as Samuel apparently said something that greatly amused his siblings. The young man's voice, so like Matthew's in its depth and cadence despite no biological connection, carried clearly through the open windows. "Listen to him," Matthew said proudly. "Our son. The man he's become." Olivia nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "He has your integrity, your sense of justice. And your courage," Matthew added, "your resilience." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars that had witnessed their journey from uncertain beginnings to this moment of fulfillment and peace. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked suddenly. "Taking on another man's child, facing the whispers, the judgment?" Matthew turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Not for a single moment," he answered without hesitation. "Samuel is my son in every way that matters. He always has been, from the moment I first held him." His blue eyes, still bright and clear despite the weathering of years and responsibilities, held her steadily. "The only regret I've ever had is that I didn't find you both sooner." Olivia reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar contours now marked by time and sun and laughter. "We found each other exactly when we were meant to," she said softly, "and every day since has been a blessing." Matthew bent to kiss her, the gesture as tender and reverent as it had been on their wedding day 22 years earlier. When they parted, he kept her close in the circle of his arms, both of them facing out toward the vast land that had become their kingdom, built on love and determination, and the unshakable bond of family. "He's mine now, too," Matthew had declared that day in Reverend Collins' presence, claiming a child born without a father's name. It had been a beginning, the first thread in a tapestry that now stretched across generations, rich with color and meaning and possibility. As the celebration continued inside and the Colorado night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket, Olivia and Matthew stood together on the porch of the home they had built, secure in the knowledge that what they had created would endure long after they were gone. Their story begun in uncertainty, forged through courage and compassion, sustained by unwavering love, had become a legacy stronger than blood, more enduring than a name on a birth certificate. As vast and promising as the western horizon that had witnessed their journey from strangers to family, from solitude to belonging. And in the end, it was the simplest truth that mattered most. They had found each other against all odds, and in doing so had discovered the meaning of home.